We've had a tremendous response this year to the World Quest competition, which I think really speaks to the level of interest in classrooms around the state and students like yourselves who realize that what happens in the world really does matter to us here in Montana. We're very fortunate today to have the opportunity to hear from Ambassador Mark Johnson, a Great Falls native and founder of the Montana World Affairs Council. During his 30 years with the State Department, Ambassador Johnson served in a variety of foreign policy positions all around the Middle East and Africa, notably serving as the ambassador to Senegal. He's most recently returned from spending 6 weeks with his wife leading tours for World Affairs Council members in Iran. And we'll head off to the Persian Gulf very soon. It's an honor and a privilege to work with Ambassador Johnson, and what a wonderful opportunity we have today to hear some of his impressions of the Middle East. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Mark Johnson.
It's a great pleasure to have all of you here, and I think it's a tribute to you, the students, your teachers, your schools, and your parents, certainly, for participating in our 6th annual Montana Academic World Quest. I think it really is impressive, and it helps to demolish the myth, right, that Montanans don't care about world affairs. Your presence surely demonstrates the contrary. Some of you no doubt have a few questions, even concerns about what's this World Quest thing all about. We hope it'll be fun, we hope it'll be educational, and we surely hope that it will maybe spark in you, if you don't already have an interest in international affairs. That's really what it's all about. Now, as Aubrey said, I grew up in Great Falls, which is that away over the mountains. It's where the wind blows. And when I was, like you, a junior or a senior, I had a very simple goal in life. I wanted to put as much distance between Great Falls and myself as I possibly could. And so I went to the East Coast. I studied there. And then I entered the Foreign Service as a junior diplomat, and I ended up in a place called Kuwait in the Persian Gulf. And I'd never been out of the country, except for Canada, and I'm not sure that really counts. So it was quite an experience. And from there I served in places like Indonesia, Africa, Burkina Faso, Kenya, and a lot in the Middle East, Iran, Egypt, Kuwait. I was in Kuwait twice. The second time I was the first diplomat to go back into Kuwait after the Desert Storm, a military conflict. And after about 35 years of being away from Montana, I came to my senses and I came back. And the nice thing about coming back to Montana is that it doesn't change much. It doesn't change much in the eastern part, doesn't change much in Glacier, Yellowstone. So it's great to be back. And one of the things I did when I returned was to establish the Montana World Affairs Council. Our council is part of a national organization called the World Affairs Councils of America. It's the largest international affairs organization in the U.S., probably the world. We are one of 90. We're probably the smallest. But I will tell you that I think our Academic World Quest program has grown as fast, if not faster, than any other program in the nation. Again, a tribute to you. One of the reasons I established the Montana World Affairs Council, actually there were 2 reasons. First of all, I didn't think any 18-year-old should be as ignorant of the world as I was when I was 18, so in some ways I thought maybe I could help change this. But the other reason was, very frankly, to me, the greatest tragedy facing the United States is this. If the United States, having globalized the rest of the world with McDonald's hamburgers and Madonna videos, fails to globalize itself. Now, what do I mean? You know, President Obama has announced the sending of another 30,000 men and women soldiers to Afghanistan. National Geographic recently did a survey, independent survey, among that same age group, 18 to 24-year-olds, and they discovered that 90% could not find Afghanistan on a map. That's what I mean. Some of you have heard of the Intel Science Competition, very prestigious, very competitive. The last time I looked a few years ago, there were about 60,000 US students who signed up to take the test. Very impressive, right? Do you know how many Chinese signed up to take it? 5 million. You see, and here's the difference. When I was a junior, senior at Great Falls Central, I didn't have to worry about that at all, but you do. It's part of your life, and it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. Now, no doubt your teachers and your parents tell you that it is important, right, to get a good education, and maybe to go to college, and even to learn about the world. It is important, they say, important. They're wrong. It's not important. It's a duty. It's a duty. Because the world we live in, you have to be connected, and you have to understand what's going on. Now, I've had the privilege of speaking around the U.S. and in the Middle East, and one of the things that I've discovered, and the reason I go on at some length, is that in our world today, apathy kills more than malice. And that's why I think you owe it to yourselves to get engaged. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Middle East. I've been there recently, as Aubrey said, in Iran, a fabulous experience, and 3 weeks I'm going off to the Persian Gulf for another set of trips. When I talk about the Middle East, I insist on making 2 points. The first is, the U.S. has had a long, long history in that region. Americans are surprised to know, for example, that it was the Middle East that shaped our very Constitution. Did you know that? The reason we have the kind of federal government we do is because of the Middle East. It relates to the war with the Barbary pirates at the beginning of the 19th century. And the pirates then, today's Tripoli, Algeria, Tunis, Tunisia, that part of the world, were preying on American ships and even taking Americans as slaves. And the young government, the young American government, had no ability to respond because at that point in time, we were a confederation. We were coming out of the Confederation. And it was the Middle East that helped move toward a stronger federal system. So the Middle East has played a valuable role. The Star-Spangled Banner has an indirect, the Middle East has had an indirect impact on our national anthem. Statue of Liberty, you've seen that, I'm sure, or know about it. That was originally intended to be at the gate of the Suez Canal. And the concept didn't work in Egypt, and the American who proposed it came back to the U.S., and that's how the Statue of Liberty got to be the way it was. So we have a long, long history in the Middle East. The second point is even more important, and it is this. At the heart of the Middle East are the people, all right? Arabs, Persians, what have you. And the people in this region are magnificent, they're wonderful, and when I go to that area, what I find is that the hospitality that I receive is not generous, it's not lavish, it's really quite overwhelming. Quite overwhelming. Well, you say, so what? We're out here in Montana, it's a long ways away. We got a lot of things here to take care of, don't we? And of course we do. But let me give you just a couple of quick reasons why it's important to focus on this vital region. First and foremost, it's where the wars are, right? How many of you know a loved one or someone that you sort of close to that has served in Iraq? Keep your hands up for just a minute. That's about 40%, right? Roughly 40%. So how real is that? It's where the wars are. The second reason that it's important, and more subliminal, I suppose, is that that region is the source of our religious heritage, right? So if you're a Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim, on some level, a part of you is denominated by that region. I mean, that's why they call it the Holy Land. Huh? So if you're a Jew, you have the Wailing Wall, a very sacred spot. If you're a Christian, you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, very, very sacred to Christians. And if you're a Muslim, you have Harim al-Sharif, where the Quran says Muhammad ascended into heaven. So you have the religious aspects of the Middle East. You have the economic aspects, and they're fairly obvious. None of you came here, I suspect, in a wind-powered or solar-powered vehicle, right? No. You came in a gasoline-powered engine, and I call it our oil dialysis, basically, because we have this overwhelming dependency on energy, and maybe your generation can do something about that. I sure hope so. 2 out of every 3 barrels of oil come from the Middle East. And that is vital not only to our economic well-being, but of our allies in Europe and our friends in Asia like the Japanese. The second reason why it's important economically, since this is a group of Montanans, I can say this when I speak in Connecticut, it doesn't work very well, but I know at least some of you have experience with growing wheat, right? Yes? Anybody grow wheat here? Know what it's all about? Yeah? Anybody grow barley? Oh, you have my deepest sympathy. See, shoveling barley in August was one of the reasons why I joined the State Department. And, you know, I itch just to talk about it now. Do you know who the largest buyer of wheat in the world is? It's Egypt. Did you know that? So when you're raising your wheat and when we're counting on it for our economic livelihood, keep in mind that a strong and prosperous Egypt is vital to the sales of that product. Now, another reason why the Middle East is important, on a lighter note, is because of its wonderful historical contributions to history and civilization. And we're going to show a few of those from Egypt. The first slide is, you know what this is, right? This is the Sphinx, all right? The Sphinx, the head of a man, a pharaoh, the headdress, the nimbus, that's a sign of royalty, and then the body of a lion. You can't see it, but it goes back quite a ways, and there's a tail. Take a look at the nose. The nose was shot off. Many people think it was done by Napoleon. That's just a cheap way of blaming the French, really, frankly. It really was a religious zealot in the 7th century when Egypt became a Muslim country, an Islamic country. Above the ear, you cannot detect this, so you just have to take my word for it. You can see the remnants of what was a brilliant red color, and it used to scare the early Arabs, and so they called it Abu Hul, the father of terror. This was built and constructed, carved, however you want to say it, in about 2500 BC. And we think, although Egyptologists aren't sure, that the face there is of the pharaoh Khufu. Now, I'll explain who Khufu is and why we remember him when we see the next slide. This is the Great Pyramid, up close. You probably haven't seen it like this before. This is the last of the remaining 7 wonders of the world that still exists. Just take a moment to stare at that. There are approximately 1.3 million blocks in that structure. And the blocks weigh anywhere from 3 to 15 tons. It's an absolute architectural masterpiece. The 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, are exactly laid out. How did they do that in 2506 BC? Moreover, the southeast corner and the northwest corner are leveled to within 7/10 of an inch. It's really astonishing when you think about it, what they were doing, 4.5 millennia ago. And that's the Grand Pyramid of Giza. You used to be able to bribe the guards and climb up to the top, but they won't let you do that anymore. The next slide shows us the greatest pharaoh, Ramses II. As you can see, he had a high opinion of himself because he had this magnificent statue carved. This is in Karnak, in the middle of Egypt, along the Nile River. It's the largest religious temple in the world. What's interesting about this, you'll have to take my word for it, but on his left leg, there's a small carving. That was his favorite daughter. And so he memorialized her and put her in. This is Ramses II in Karnak. And then the last slide is a very beautiful picture of the temple of the ceremonial temple at Luxor. All right, and you can't see them; they're not clearly, easily defined here. But on the pylons are carvings that represent ancient life in Egypt. So this is some of the wonderful contributions to history and to civilization. And we'll leave that there, and you can enjoy that. Let me tell you about today's Middle East, because it's not quite, dare I say, as wonderful and as spectacular as that. In fact, it's pretty rough right now. There are several crises going on. The Obama administration has its hands full, as if they didn't have enough to do, right? There's the Middle East. I think first and foremost, the most enduring of these crises is the conflict between the Arabs of Palestine and the Jews of Israel. It's hard to imagine that it's now in its 7th decade. It shows no sign of being resolved. It began as, I would say, an experiment in mutual ignorance. Each side steadfastly denied not the existence of the threat posed by the other, but the very legitimacy of the other. Arabs, Israelis, Palestinians. And in its simplest basis, simplest manner, it is a struggle about land for peace, all right? Land for the Palestinians, security for the Israelis. Now, it's gotten a little more complicated over the years, so we have things like the status of Jerusalem. Now, I mentioned it, the Holy Land. Jerusalem is the site of these 3 holy places. Who will control them? When Israel was founded in 1948, about 750,000 Palestinians fled. Do they have the right to come back? The question of land, how much of the West Bank, I know you've studied geography, so you have a familiarity with the West Bank, how much of that land should be dedicated to the Palestinians? How much of that will be kept for the Israelis? In 2000, the Clinton proposals, which I had participated in before I left the State Department, promised about 95% of the West Bank to the Palestinians, but that deal fell through. The real issues now are, on one side, the Israeli side, the question of settlements. One of the peace organizations in Israel projects that there are something like 70,000 housing projects planned on what is Palestinian land. The settlements have increased steadily since the first one in about 1967. On the Palestinian side, there is the issue of terrorism. Since 2001, approximately 8,000 rockets, missiles, mortars, what have you, have been fired into Israel. Now, my point is, there's no right and no wrong in this situation if we're going to try and understand it. And both sides are moving toward their more extreme elements. Certainly this is the case in Israel. And there are elements within the Palestinian side, such as Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others. And as a Secretary of State once said back about 40 years ago, he said, you know, when both sides claim they have an exclusive channel to God, one of them has the Torah, and the other has the Quran, and when you have that situation going on, you know you're going to have a very, very long negotiation. And that's where we are today. I was just thinking about this driving in. I had my first briefing on this issue in 1968. And I'll have to tell you that I have never seen it so difficult and dangerous as it is today. It is, in effect, an escalation to nowhere. There are no winners in this. No winners in this. Now, the second issue that is playing out, 40% of you have some personal connection with this. All of you are aware of it, I'm sure. Iraq. Iraq. It is really quite amazing in the Middle East, a surprising place. Well, here's one of the surprises. As the Vice President said recently, this could be one of the greatest accomplishments of the Obama administration. On Sunday, the Iraqis are going to have a national election. What makes that remark, you know, we just yawn. Well, yeah, election, we know all about that, right? No, you have to understand that in Iraq, politics are determined by two words: coups and coffins. And the central question for Iraq has always been, was Iraq the way it was because of Saddam Hussein? Or was Saddam Hussein the way he was because of Iraq? On Sunday, we're going to have an opportunity to answer that, and I hope maybe in your World Issues class or Current Events class you might take a moment to discuss the outcome. It will be one of the very few times that an Arab nation has picked a government based on the consent of the people. Consent of the people. They don't dream about democracy, they die for it. It's a very significant event. I hope it goes well, and it will be of great consequence throughout that region, because Iraq has the potential of being a wealthy country. It has agriculture, it has a lot of oil, some of the biggest deposits of oil in the world. All of this will help the region, Middle East region, and it will be helpful for people in Europe and in the U.S. Now, another crisis that we're really not aware of, but is raging in the Middle East. Some of you have read or heard of a book by a professor called Huntington, and the title of his book was The Clash, Clash of Civilizations, right? Well, this is a clash of a civilization, and it's the battle within Islam. And very simply, it is over, is Islam appropriate for the 21st century, or is it appropriate for the 7th century? Put differently, between those who believe in reason and the ability to bend Islam to the modern age, and those like Osama bin Laden who think that Islam must stay rigidly, puritanically rooted in the 7th century. I'll give you an example. This will help illustrate it. 2 days in July, the year was 2005, July 6th, a group of leading Islamic scholars met in Amman, Jordan. And in this conference, in this gathering, they issued a religious ruling, a fatwa, and they condemned Osama bin Laden for claiming that violence and jihad and terrorism were legitimate and appropriate tools. They said nothing of the kind. There is no justification for this. They rebuked him in very strong terms. Now, I'm positive, as a matter of fact, nobody in this room remembers that. It happened, trust me, July 6th, 2005. What you may remember happened the following day, right? July 7th. 4 men, Muslim, of Pakistani origin, with backpacks, smiling as they went into the London Underground, the Tube, detonated bombs and obliterated themselves and 52 innocent people. So the question is, which of those is the true face of Islam? Which of those is Islam? Now, you know, if we're honest with ourselves and the way we look at things and the way we get information, we say, oh, it's the second, isn't it? There's an enormous battle within the Muslim world, sort of who speaks for Islam. And I think there's some significant pushback against the forces of radicalism. There was a religious scholar from Pakistan, yesterday, for example, has just issued a 600-page study, and basically what he says is, violence is violence, terrorism is terrorism, and what Osama bin Laden is saying is not inadequate in any way justification or explanation. So this is, for the moment, a good thing. So we need to keep our eyes on that. And next, let me discuss with you the world's biggest migraine headache. Anybody guess what that is? Take a guess. It's in the Middle East. Afghanistan is the smallest, second largest migraine headache. It's Iran. It's Iran. A couple of points about Iran. Number one, Iran is not an Arab nation. Many people get this confused. Iran has an entirely different historical, cultural, linguistic narrative. In fact, they resent Arabs. They look down on Arabs. They consider themselves the heirs of one of the great civilizations of the world, the Persian Empire. All right? So in fact, one of the great poets said, damn these uncivilized Arabs who have come to our land to force us to become Muslims. And then they go on and, in the same poem to call them lizard eaters. So I guess that doesn't tell you what they think of them. The point is, Iran sees itself as in a different level and in a superior way, all right? Iran has had a history of outside interference, and that has colored the way they think. Now, what are the problems here? Well, the one that we're most familiar with is the bomb, right? The nuclear weapon issue. I have no doubt in my mind, having been there for 6 weeks, and having studied this, and having been myself in Iran just weeks before the U.S. hostages were seized in 1979, that Iran is, on a secret, clandestine basis, moving toward the development of, quote unquote, a weapon. That's not to say that they would use it, but nevertheless, they want to at least at a very minimum, perpetuate the belief, the fear, the apprehension that they are doing that. In other words, for a nation that says they're only interested in building a civilian plant, they have a funny way of showing it, don't they? They're building neutron initiators, which are triggers for nuclear bombs. They're testing missiles. They just have announced some other weaponry today. They have plants that are secret that are enriching uranium. I don't have any problem whatsoever with Iran's desire to develop a nuclear plant for electricity. I think not only is that appropriate, I think it's commendable, because Iran realizes that it's going to run out of its valuable gas and oil, and so they're trying to develop this for domestic sources. I was involved with this in the late 70s, trying to sell U.S. technology to Iran before the revolution and all hell broke out. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a kind of blackmail potential that Iran would have. And, oh, by the way, this has sparked a competition, if you will, on the Arab side of the Persian Gulf. The Egyptians have talked about it. The Saudis are talking about it. The Jordanians are talking about it. And so unwittingly or wittingly, we may have triggered some sort of a nuclear race here in the region. This is not a good thing. The other major problem today in Iran is the internal political situation. Iran is experiencing the most turbulence I've ever seen since 1979. So what's that, 31 years. People your age are in the streets of Tehran and Isfahan and Shiraz and Mashhad and places throughout the country protesting. Basically, at the beginning they were protesting a fraudulent election, June 12th. And so what they would say is, they would, in the streets, Man rai kojast, Man rai kojast, where's my vote? And now it has gone beyond that, and the slogans you hear, the slogan you hear most is Marg bar dictator, Marg bar dictator, Marg bar dictator, death to the dictator. And they're met with massive shows of force, all right? So police come up, paramilitary police called the Basij come up and wield these batons and beat you in the face and head. If you're a woman, they'll go aim for your knees. It's brutal, it's repressive, it's reptilian. It really is quite appalling. And I'm not sure when it's going to end, that's the point. I'm not sure that we're going to see a climax. I always feel about Iran that things will get worse before they get worse. And that's the reality that we're looking at. Now the other problem of Iran, Afghanistan was just mentioned, good point. Iraq we just talked about. Palestine, Israel we just talked about. In each of these conflicts, crises, issues, Iran, the non-Arab, will play a role. A successful outcome in Iraq, whatever that means, whatever successful means, will depend on Iraq and on Iran. And that's why I say, take a moment to talk about these elections. At that point, early next week, you should have a clue as to whether those forces backing the Iranians have triumphed, or those who want Iraq for the Iraqis have triumphed, if you see what I mean. I think that's very important. Ditto for Afghanistan. Iran has significant interest in Afghanistan. Iran is underwriting, financing, supporting Hamas to the tune of $7 or $8 million a month. In fact, the Palestinians joke, it's not funny, but in 2005, the Prime Minister of Israel, a man named Ariel Sharon, decided to evacuate Israeli settlements from Gaza, that little stretch of land, that little sliver of land. And he did. 7,000 settlers, about 21 settlements. He evacuated that. And the Palestinians joke, they say, yeah, you know, we got rid of the Israelis, now we got the Iranians. And they don't seem to ever be able to catch a break. Iran sits astride the Straits of Hormuz. They have the ability to influence, let us say politely, disrupt the flow of a lot of the world's oil. Every day in that narrow passageway, which is about 3.5 to 5 miles wide, 17 million barrels a day flow. 17 million barrels a day. That's at least 3 times the daily production of the United States. And I can tell you from previous experience, when one tanker sunk, it was a catastrophe. And if they were to sink 3, 4, God forbid, even more, it would be an economic and political nightmare. That's the migraine headache known as Iran. But there is another side to Iran, and I'm going to show you that, so that I leave you, this is the impression I want to leave you with, and it is, as I said at the outset, of the people. The people were wonderful. Iranians, like Americans, we were welcomed at all levels, men, women, young, old. They were eager to talk with us. They have a great sense of humor. At one city, they came up and said, are you tourists or terrorists? Which I thought was kind of a funny. And the question they always asked was, are you safe? Do you feel okay here? And so we would say, Dustaram Iran. We like Iran. We like the people. We like the people. I personally don't like the government, but we like the people. And now I'm going to show you a few faces. These are some real Iranians. So if we can show those from the Iran side. All right. Do they look mean and menacing to you? It's a family, my wife in the blue scarf in the middle, Sally, mother with her daughter, her sister, and a neighboring friend. This is in a small town called Kerman, which is part of the spice route, not the silk route, the spice route. It's where a lot of the cumin is grown. This is how Iranian women dress. They're supposed to be fully covered. Just doesn't look like Saudi Arabia. You can see the women have beautiful hair. And they go, they go to great lengths to kind of show it. It's sort of a daring thing, but this is what they look like. This is a group of wonderful women. Typically in a setting like that, the youngest girl would speak more English than her parents or relatives. The next slide, this is the inside of a mosque. This is the beautiful calligraphy and tile work of Persia. It's really unbelievable, and this slide doesn't do it justice. The yellow represents the sunlight, and the blue represents water. But it is just breathtaking when you're inside and you're staring up. Try another one here. These are 2 young girls in Shiraz. They must be about 12. And just very, I won't say precocious, that would not be the right word, but they came up to us and they sought us out, and so we're having a little conversation. And I want to try my Farsi, my Persian, and they want to try their English. What is your name? Where do you live? And they're wearing, they're a little bit different dressed than the women you saw before. These are their school uniforms. Schooling is free in Iran, and they do a pretty decent job with hard science. I don't know about the humanities at all. It's probably rather rigorously controlled. Some of the other women in this picture are some of the Americans that were in our tour. These children are about 12. They're at the tomb of Hafez. Hafez is one of the greatest lyric poets in the world. He is considered by Iranians to be equal to or greater than Shakespeare. Enormous pride in their poets. Another poet named Sadi, when you go to the United Nations, you'll see one of his verses over the door, and it says, "We are all members of the same human body. When one part of the body is damaged or afflicted, the other parts of the body cannot remain unmoved." And so every Iranian that we met has the book of verses by Hafez. So it's a very good place to meet Iranians. They're very proud of that. Then we'll look at the next one now. These are the guys. And they're a little bit more outgoing and effusive than the women. And they love to talk politics to us. Okay, they can say things to us that they couldn't say to other Iranians. I had an Iranian come up to us, a well-educated, well-dressed person. By the way, Iranian men do not wear ties. They don't wear ties. That's considered a symbol of Western decadence. But they wear good suits, and other than the tie, very well dressed. I had a fellow once in the central bank come up to me, and we were talking, and he leaned over and whispered to us. And I've never seen this man again. I'll never see him, the rest of my life. But he whispered to us, he said, "We're the most stupid president in the world." Which I thought was, these guys were even more outspoken. These would be the faces of those Iranians that despise their government. Presumably better educated, secular, not religious. I had left Iran in 1979, and so 30 years later, I go back. And the two things that I found in the 30-year absence, number one, Iran today is less, even though it's an Islamic republic, it is less religious than it was in 1979. That's surprising, less religious. Because people like these guys see religion as kind of a stranglehold, if you will. The religious clergy use it as a monopoly to keep power. And the second thing I saw, which is not as pleasant, is that Iran today is much more repressive and brutal than it was under the Shah of Iran. And I know a thing or two about the Shah of Iran, so that's saying quite a lot. These guys were just wonderful, and we could have spent the whole afternoon talking. I am sure if we'd stayed there, we would have had dinner at their homes. And they would have introduced us to their mothers and their and so forth and so on. They're not, I don't think any of them were married, but they were a lot of fun. And keep that image in your mind when you think about Iran. I think I have one more slide possibly. This is a fun picture here. It won't mean a thing to you, so I'll describe it for you. This is in a central park, a municipal park in Tehran. And we had to take it, it's taken this way deliberately. You can see figures there in the background. That's a women's exercise class. The Iranians love to get up and exercise. They get up about 6:30 in the morning, 6:30. And they play badminton, they play volleyball. The men, they're fierce chess players. They're some of the best chess players in the world. So you have these little pavilions where 40 chessboards are in use. And they're doing jumping jacks here. And my wife was there, and she sort of looked at them, and they said, "Come on over." She said, "Well, it's a great way, if you're doing jumping jacks, to learn how to count in Farsi. Yek, do, say, shahar. Yek, do, say, chahar. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that was typical of the warmth and hospitality that we received when we were there. And let's see if we could put up one of the Egyptian pictures. Just you have that in mind. I'll be happy to take a few questions, but the way I'd like to conclude this is the way I began, that we have problems with the Middle East. And one of the problems we as Americans have dealing with this region is we're impatient. Let's get this thing over with. Let's put this behind us. Let's move on. We like to have a solution. It's not like Law and Order that gets wrapped up in, an hour. And so impatience is our problem. And in fact, Saddam Hussein once said, he's not noted for being a funny guy, said, the Americans are like an Iraqi peasant that gets married. 3 days of honeymoon and back to the fields, meaning they don't have any patience for this stuff. I think the best way to conclude is with the words of Winston Churchill. He said, where we are, this was decades ago, he said, where we are today in the Middle East He said, we're not at the end, we're not even at the middle. He said, where we are is at the end of the beginning. That's where we are, and I hope that, again, this will spark some interest in getting engaged, because this region needs all the help it can get. And with that, I'll say thank you, and I think we have time for some questions if there's any interest, or not. Yes, sir.
Are visas available to travel to Iran recreationally for Americans? Secondly, when you were in Iran, you mentioned that you might have gone to dinner with this young man you met. How free is travel within Iran?
We answer the first question. Visas are possible. You can get visas. They're scrutinized, so it's not easy. I mean, they just don't give them out. But yes, you can get visas. It's easier if you go with a group, okay? It's like a tour. And I was, as the leader, I had 2 groups of 25 people. Now, it's interesting. My wife and I deliberately decided to get there early, several days early on our own. We didn't know what to expect. We got into the airport. This is unique to Iran. It was a 300 plus passengers, Iran Air, and we were the only Americans. So when we went through, they stopped us politely, took our passports, said, go sit down, and they kept us there for about an hour, and we were fingerprinted. Now the reason they do that is because we fingerprint them. So I get that, I understand that, and we were expecting that. But the next morning we got up and said, well, let's walk around. We didn't know what to expect. Guards would stop us, people would be there taking pictures of us. No, we walked out of the hotel, walked around Tehran, rode the metro, the subway, and we didn't have any problems whatsoever. Now, when we were part of the group, we had to be on a bus and we had to have a tour guide. And I think that's a requirement, but there were possibilities for us to go around completely unencumbered and, if you will, unsupervised. Iran is you won't believe what I'm about to say, but what I'm about to tell you, but I'll tell you anyway. One of the holiest cities in Iran is in Mashhad. It's on the eastern part. There's the tomb of a saint. And we went into our hotel, and there was a large carving in walnut wood, a large carving. And it must have been 5 feet high and about 12 feet long. And you know what it was? You're not going to believe this. It was the Last Supper. Unbelievable. This is an Islamic republic. And yet the Iranians were comfortable with that. They were okay. You would have never seen that in Saudi Arabia. So yeah, we were able to travel about. Yes? Arabs are informed by their language, by the Arabic language. All right? So a lot of people say it's their religion. It's not. Because there are Arab Baptists, there are a few Arab Jews, Arab Presbyterians. It's the Arab language that makes an Arab an Arab. The Arab world consists of about 22 countries. It is roughly the same size geographically as the United States, roughly. And it is roughly the same size population-wise, about 300 million. 22 countries, the members of the so-called Arab League. And the Arabic language is kind of the glue, the cohesion that keeps them together. So, well, we have a moment or two to talk about WorldQuest. I think you've been briefed on what will unfold, right? You've got 10 categories of questions. And I think as much fun as the questions are, I think you'll enjoy meeting our mayor, the mayor of Missoula, John Engen. This will be his 3rd or 4th year, I think, that he's done that. He's got a great sense of humor, and obviously he enjoys this. The winning team will go to Washington, D.C. to compete in the national competition. This is important, I think, for me to say. 3, 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, the winning team from Montana took 2nd place in the nation. Quite amazing. And then last year, the winning team from Montana took 4th place. And I think, you know, to the teachers and to the students and administrators and everybody here. I think that's a great tribute to what we're doing in Montana. Last word, and then we'll break and we'll set the room up for the competition. The last word is, any of you that are interested in international affairs, international activities, speakers, please contact us at the World Affairs Council. Aubrey Lyons is the executive director. She or I will be in touch with you. And maybe, you know, we could come out to your school and speak. I mean, you've heard me speak now for, what, 45 minutes. Maybe it's, you know, that's enough, right? But, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting when you go to the East Coast, and speak, I have to point out to them that in the East Coast, in places like Philadelphia or Delaware, 100 miles is a long distance. And when you get to Montana, 100 years is a long time, and that's essentially the difference between the East and the West. So 100 miles is nothing, right? Drive that for a hamburger. Okay. I think that's about enough unless there's any more questions. I'll be wandering around. Enjoy yourselves, get ready, and we wish you all the best of luck for the competition. Thank you.